Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Jazz or V, whatever you like to call me. And today, get yourself something to drink. I have a whole lot of water here, a non-political drink, like tap water, and sit down because I feel we will be yapping for a little while because I have a lot to say. As you saw from the title, we are going into a bit of a touchy subject today that some people might not like to talk about, but I do love to talk about it. So sit down, get ready, because today we're talking about the books that radicalized me. And yeah, why are we doing this? Because simple. Reading is political. I know. We have this whole tangent about, well, we're reading for escapism and not every book has to have a political message, etc., etc. Well, I'm here to tell you that you don't need to read a book with a political message for reading to be political, because in a time where education crisis is at its peak, I might even peak even more, we have a huge education crisis and literacy is declining rapidly. You grabbing a book and reading it is a political act. Because if I may quote George Orwell here, and that might be a little foreshadowing for what's to come, because he said in his essay, Literature and Totalitarianism, I suggest that if totalitarianism triumphs throughout the world, literature as we have known it is at its end. Yeah, that's what he said, and I totally agree. So the fact that you are picking up a book in a time where book banning is in fashion again and misinformation is rampant, you are being a little rebel. You're being a little radical here. So yeah, that's why we are talking about this today. Now, for me, as a person who considers someone else calling themselves as not political to be a red flag, I feel it is only just to tell you about books that I have read that radicalized me, because I have read many books, not just as an act of being a little rebel in a time where reading is being killed off. Let's be for real here. No, I've also read books that actually sharpened my view on certain things and broadened my horizon on other things. Now, of course, I was already quite radical before I read these books. However, these books definitely helped me be more informed about things, to reflect on things that I've already thought about and like sharpen my opinion on them, and also just educated me on things that I may have not been that knowledgeable about. So we could say these books radicalized me even more. Today I have for you 5 books that I would say radicalized me. But then also, I have 3 books that I want to read in the future to stay educated and broaden my horizon. And of course, it wouldn't be a list of mine if there wouldn't be some honorable mentions of books that I have read that I think also very much fall into the field, but maybe a little bit more niche or a bit more hard to approach. And you already have to have certain point of views in order to get the messages that are layered in these books. So if you also consider reading to be a radical act and are a little bit of a rebel by picking up a book every now and then, or you just enjoy listening to someone yap about books in general, you can click the subscribe button down below, like this video, and I will be in your inbox every now and then. And now, without further ado, let's get into the 5 books that radicalized me. I have a variety of books for you, and some of them I've talked about before because, some books just have that impact on you. And the first one I've read last November, so it's quite recent, and it's none other than The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. It was a 5-star read for me last year, and it is a book I would recommend to everyone. Like, that is mandatory reading to me. Come on. Pick up this book if you haven't already. So this book poses a confrontation between an anarchist society and a capitalist system as we have it here on our planet, or generally a system how we have it on our planet where powers are distributed in a similar way as they are here on planet Earth. However, it plays in a different galaxy, maybe even, at least in a different solar system. I'm not sure about the galaxy, but definitely a different solar system. And it's about 2 planets. One is called Anaris and one is Oras. And on Anaris, there is anarchy. People have migrated from Aras to Anaris 100 years ago because they did not agree with the capitalist society they were living in. And on the other planet, that one called Oras is quite like our own. And in the midst of it, we have our character Shevek, who travels from his anarcho planet to this capitalist society. And he is a scientist and he hopes that the people in the capitalist society on Oras are actually more open to his scientific research and his development compared to the people at home. And yeah, this book is doing a marvelous job of taking you as the reader with them as Shevek discovers this world and discovers how capitalism functions because he is confronted with things that he does not know from home. For example, class, sexism, and the erasure of poor people because they do not fit into the image this world wants to show him or the society wants to show him. So he is now in a world where capitalists fight against communists, where women are treated as a nice accessory and don't get to have a voice where things are important, and the poor people are dying in the streets because they do not have enough money to take care of themselves. Now, what did this book do where I could say it radicalized? Because that's kind of a drastic thing to say, isn't it? Well, if you think about it, we are having a story where we have a character who is not used to the life we know as normal. Like you and I, we're probably used to capitalism in some way or another, or to some other oppressive system, because let's be for real, I can't think of a place on earth that is not an oppressive system. Let me think. No, I can't. Everyone's like, lower class people, we're being oppressed. Like, that's just how it goes. It has been going like this all through history. So we are with Shevek, and Shevek is like looking at these things and he's like, wait a minute, what's going on? And that also is what happened in my brain. Like, obviously I've been questioning our systems for a very long time. However, through Shevek, we kind of get confronted with how weird certain things really are and how like it's just not normal to treat people a certain way, that how they are being treated. And it's very much a mirror onto how we are doing things, because like why are our leaders, our world leaders that we have voted more or less democratically, why are they in different countries killing the poorest of the poor for oil? Why? Like, that's just a question to ask, and we are facing similar situations in Uras. And also, the book is very interesting because it shows a society where everyone is the same. We are on Anadas and everyone is the same. Everyone has the same rights. Everyone owns the same things, which is nothing but a name, basically. And there's equality through and through, or equity through and through. And that makes it so interesting because it shows us how such a world could work. And of course, such a world is probably not perfect as well, but it also gives a perspective on how things could be different. And that is what makes the book so interesting and made me think a lot. I also found that the choice of having a man as the main character was very interesting because Ursula K. Le Guin is definitely someone who brings up feminist themes in her books. And yeah, I remember reading this book and I texted my friend who recommended this book to me and I said, the thing about men being written by women is that at the end of the day, they're still just men. And I really thought it was genius how Ursula K. Le Guin showed that certain things are, even in a society where everyone's the same, when we come to a place where there is a gap, be it for gender or sex, once you're in a position where you're privileged, you also act privileged, even if you didn't grow up with that. And I think that is what makes it so interesting. It shows how the system actively influences people, even if they are not used to living in that system, that they are still going to be part of it and participate in an oppressive society just because they have privilege. And that is something we should be thinking about and talking about. We should be talking about it as well. So this book shows us how power to the people can look like. It shows us how people fight against oppressive powers. And it also shows us like a gruesome mirror on how messed up certain things actually are that we are doing still today. Like, this book was written in the 80s, nothing has changed, let's be for real. Like, some countries may have different names, but at the end of the day, still the same power dynamics going on. So yeah, that's The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. Highly recommend, and the first book that I wanted to talk to you about. Now, the second one, there can't be a list about being radicalized without mentioning this book. And of course, it is one of the books I think about on the daily, 1984 by George Orwell. It's actually the very first book I read that is on this list. And this book, yeah, let me talk about it. So this book was published in 1948 by George Orwell, and it paints a dystopian future that plays in the year of 1984. So it's what George Orwell predicted the future to be like 35 years in the future. And it's interesting because we are following our character Winston Smith, who lives in a society and works for the state, and his job is changing newspaper articles from the past to align with the current party's point of view, the ruling party's point of view, and also, of course, destroying evidence that anything else has existed before. So we could say he is part of the propaganda apparatus and is in charge of public opinion and also collective memory, if we want to say it like that. So one day he kind of remembers that something happened but can't find any evidence that it did, and that makes him think about whether what he knows is actually the truth, if the things the party is saying are actually true. Like, is it really true that we're at war? Is it really true what's going on outside of the capital where I'm living? How do I know? How can I verify this? Can I verify it? And he starts questioning things. And if there's something you don't do, it's question things in an oppressive system. And that is exactly what this book is showing us. A famous quote you might have heard before, or maybe not, maybe you're hearing it here for the first time, is who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. So if you're in control, you can change what has happened and what will happen. That is what they're trying to say. And another quote I really like, and that one is one that George Orwell also wrote about in one of his essays, is freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 = 4, then everything else follows. Because a thing that is reoccurring, that is going on there, is that if the party tells you 2 + 2 = 5, then 5 is the correct answer, even if you know it is 4. And this book really put into perspective how important it is that we verify our sources, that we think for ourselves, and that we question everything, even ourselves. I'm not saying we should walk around being paranoid that no one's saying the truth, but I'm saying that if there's something where you're not sure if it's true, you better check on that. If it's something when you can't when you've been gaslit by your government, that can happen. Verify, go and check. And that's why I say having books is a radical act, because as long as we have these books, we can look up things. As long as we have, especially if we have older books as well, there are certain wordings in there that can show us that things existed at some point, because we don't know what's coming in the future. And I think for myself, that is like a big thing, that I feel like we don't know which country is going into totalitarianism next. We are seeing it globally, that it's happening more and more, that people forget that they also have power, that they do not stand up for their rights, and that we have to live with real consequences due to that. I don't want to know what's happening 20 years from now. Am I scared? Not really. I'm just living my life. I'm like, we gotta do what we gotta do. There's no point in fear-mongering myself into like a dark future, but we do have to be like aware that, okay, maybe the dystopia we're reading about is not that far from the dystopia we are actually living. And that is something that 1984 put into my head. Like, for the first time, I really was like, me saying we live in a dystopia, maybe I'm not that wrong, because this book, it's not that different. Like, of course, it's a painted world. We don't, like, he didn't know what's going to happen, but there are parallels that are a little scary. A little bit. This book really shows the power of how indoctrination works, how you can create a collective memory if you want to, and how the people in power do not always want the best for their humans. That's just how it is, or they don't understand what the best might be. That for 1984. And now, drink some water. Moving away from questioning the political system, let's go into deeply rooted systematic oppression of women. The next book I actually have physically. Here it is. It's called Kim Ji-young, born 1982 by Nam-Joo. This book is by a Korean author. And it's about the life of this woman called Kim Ji-young. She's born in 1982, And yeah, it's just following her life. It's following the ups and downs of her life. Along the way, it's showing all the different ways she is being discriminated against due to being a woman. Now, of course, this plays in Korea, so there's also footnotes on statistics regarding sexism in Korea. It's very interesting. It's a fictional book, but the author still put like actual facts, like it's based in reality. It's did fiction. And yeah, this book, let me tell you. So when I read it, I was like, oh yeah, it's like, okay, these things are happening to her. But for every single situation, no matter if she was a child, if she was a teenager in school, if she was a student in university, if she was a worker in the office, if she was a wife to her husband, even when she was a mother, every single situation she faced, I either knew a person who have experienced the exact same thing, or I experienced it myself. And like, isn't that crazy? Like, let's just isn't that insane? So this book really made me realize, like, are we just all living the same crazy reality? No matter where we are on the planet, no matter how far developed our legislatures are and how laws are regarding sexism, we're still all experiencing the exact same thing. No matter if this is in Korea or if this is here in Western Europe. It's the same ways of catcalling, the same ways of discrimination, the same expectation placed upon you just because you are socialized as a girl. And this book, I admire how it did that. I really admire how it was clicking in my brain. And I do think this is a book that anyone who grew up socialized as a girl should read this book. And everyone who grew up socialized as a boy should read it as well. And then believe people when they tell you that this is our lived experience. And yes, you can say, but this is in Korea. Yeah, it happened here as well. Exactly the same things. And I think this is crazy. And that book really made me realize that when a child is born, a coin is flipped, and then you either grow up with privilege or you grow up in an oppressive system that is not made for you. And it also showed how discrimination is really just planted into society and into the brains of people with the way we are bringing up children. We are teaching them to be sexist. Not on purpose, that's subconsciously because it's so ingrained in our culture to be sexist. And every one of us has had situations like that. Like, let's be for real. There's so many. I remember when I was a teenager, that was like a thing that I don't really like to hang out with girls. Like, girls are so dramatic. Like, why are we saying this? Let's just think about it. Because we are told that if a girl is fighting with another girl, she is being a B word. If a boy's fighting with a boy, he's just like, oh yeah, they're just, boys will be boys. Dude. So yeah, that's what this book did to me. Like, I was aware of it, but this book there are books that just, something you already know is just put into perspective. It's like puzzle pieces slotting together, and you're like, wait a minute. And yeah, that's what this book did. So yeah, this is Kim Ji-young, born 1982. That's what this book changed in my brain. Now, next up, we go from oppressing women to another kind of oppression that I'm dealing with. Maybe not all of you, but I'm definitely dealing with. We are looking at racism, because this book taught me a lot about systematic racism and how racism is being put in place and put into our heads. I'm talking about Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. So this book is an autobiography of Trevor Noah's life growing up at the end of apartheid South Africa as a child to a black mother and a white father, which is, who would have guessed, illegal. It's illegal to reproduce between a black and a white person, which is why the book is called what it's called, Born a Crime, because his whole existence is a crime. Now, this book, fantastic, because Trevor Noah manages to not only tell his story in a lighthearted way, even though it is devastating what happened to him as a kid and how he had to grow up. But no, he also chose to add interludes between every single chapter that talk about South African history, but also about the history of racism in general, and especially how racism is a system put in place by white colonizers in order to get the people of the country to work against each other. So he put the whole thing of divide and conquer into perspective by showing us what he grew up with, but also how it is historically rooted in colonization. And I think it's a great read just because of that, to look at the divide and conquer part. Because if we look at what's happening today, you know, who is fighting who? If we are being for real, divide and conquer is active AF, because instead of, talking about billionaires becoming richer, big companies making more money and not paying their workers enough, we are fighting each other. The workers are fighting other workers. The poor people are fighting the immigrants who are also poor. The middle class families are fighting single moms. The gays are fighting trans people. The lesbians are fighting the bisexual women. What are we doing? The women are fighting trans women, the TERFs. And like, that's exactly what ruling class has done to us, to the people. They have divided us and put us up against each other while they're chilling and making money. And isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? And that's exactly the same thing that's happening or happened in South Africa, where you have all these oppressed minorities that just hate each other, even though they should hate the common denominator. They should hate the oppressor instead. But it's not possible because the system has been established so well, ingrained so much into your life, that you think the enemy is the other brown person that is living in the house next to you, instead of, like, the one who told you that the other brown person is the bad guy. Well, they're making money out of the lack of your basic human rights. That's exactly what this book has put into context for me. And I think it's extremely interesting on how this is explored, because Trevor Noah, while the book is funny, like, I laughed tears, there is so much of this in there that if you just read it, you are like, that's actually interesting. Like, how is he, because he is half white, getting certain privileges that a black kid is not getting, even though he himself is surrounded by black kids all the time. Even his own family treats him different because he has a white half. That's crazy. Let's think about it. So yeah, that's Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. Highly recommend. Deals with racism, systematic racism, and it's a way to explore it that isn't just a nonfiction book in your face telling you the facts, but instead packed into the story of someone's life, of someone's real lived experience, in a way that you can still laugh. That's what makes this book approachable and just brilliant. So that's book number 4. Now we have one book left, which I also read last December, and that book, it was very interesting to me because it's from a region of the world where I don't frequently read from, and I think that's why it actually had such an impact on me. And it is Tales of the Tikongs by Epeli Hauʻofa. This book is a short story collection, fictional short story collection of an island called Tikon. That's in the Pacific, a Pacific island. The island is so small that you can't find it on a map, so it doesn't exist. It's a fictional island, and it just tells different stories on the life of the people there, and all the stories are kind of connected. Like, you will meet characters you've met before, and all the stories kind of talk about how these Pacific Island nations, or this nation specifically, this fictional one, how they dealt and deal with the fact that they are being colonized or attempted to be colonized, how they deal with white people arriving and Western Europeans trying to establish system, but also how they deal with standardizing education systems, which is an interesting part, how they deal with religion, very interesting, how collective memory can be altered, how tradition is something that can be overturned by, divide and conquer, and what I already talked about, and also on how capitalism and globalization has a direct effect on native communities in the Pacific Islands. And I think that was something that for me, I was not yet very informed about. And this book really helped me establish a bigger understanding of this specific aspect, especially the education aspect, but also the globalization aspect. So I found this book had wisdom on every page. It was not easy to identify it, but it was extremely critical of especially religion brought to the Pacific Islands, but it also did a marvelous job showcasing on how colonialization is actually something that happens in your head. It's not just taking land, it is also colonizing the brain as well. And this book deals with decolonizing the brain, which I think is such an important thing we should be doing, and taking away imperial thoughts and imperial ideas on how life should be lived and what a good life is like. It's kind of making fun of it. It's making fun of the fact that certain people there are colonized in the mind so much that they are actually going against their own beliefs, their own traditions, and calling them crazy just because they think what the colonizers brought is actually the right thing. Now, I don't want to be too critical of a specific religion here because it doesn't really matter. Systematic religion is, something to be discussed in a different situation. But the fact that Christianity is brought up over and over again in the book very much shows how the Christian belief system and the one God system and Jesus was your savior, etc., how that impacts actual native life of Pacific Islanders and tradition, because suddenly the gods that they've believed in for thousands and thousands of years as they were living in the Pacific and on these islands suddenly is considered not good because the colonial powers, imperial powers, have brought a new religion and declared that this is the true religion. And I think that is very, telling as well on how the brain is being colonized, how that is a thing that happens. It's not just land. Land is a part of it, but it's not just that. It's a lot that just happens in the head that, due to indoctrination, establishing certain education systems that need to be practiced by everyone there, and certain beliefs that are being taught, the traditional beliefs and the original ties this country and the people had, or this land and the people had, is just being eliminated. And that was a very interesting read for me. That made me think a lot. It made me reflect a lot because the book is it is satirical in a way. It makes fun of things, but it's very serious. It's a very serious subject. And then another part that made me think a lot is I study at the moment, and I was working in student rep, and I'm for education, and people should have access to education. But this book brings up how certain education standards that Europeans have established, that in Europe is considered something positive, which, great, can actually, for places with big traditional beliefs, with small communities, it can be danger to them when we suddenly have certain standards, like you need to have this and this degree to do this and this job, is just normalized. And also the whole situation of migration happening, because job opportunities that you can have in a different country, like New Zealand and Australia in this case, are much bigger than in your home country, because in your home country, certain degrees don't actually have the same value as they probably have in, I don't even know what to call it, the global north, but it's Australia. You know what I mean. So that made me think a lot, because I'm so big on like education for everyone and how we should make opportunities for everyone. But I feel this perspective of how this actually affects small regions is one that made me think. So it was very educational for me. This book made me reflect a lot on how I view these things. And also, it shows how globalization is a danger for small communities. Because when we globalize everything, then people will leave their homes and their native communities because there's a better opportunity in a different place due to globalization. And that has real impact on real people and real communities out there. And I think that's something that is often forgotten in debates regarding migration and poverty, global poverty. So yeah, that was the fifth book. Whew. So, with the fifth book out of our way, we are coming to two honorable mentions I just want to leave here for you. The first one is, of course, by my queen, Octavia E. Butler, and it's Bloodchild and Other Stories. I only finished this book this month, but it made me think. I gave it 5 stars, spoiler. I gave it 5 stars. Like, I've already read Bloodchild a while ago, but I finally read the other stories in Bloodchild and Other Stories, you know. Why is it an honorable mention? Because it's a short story collection, and Octavia, in every single one of her short story that are fiction, that are science fiction or fantasy, she brings up a question that is actually relevant to our lives today in a certain way or form. She shows different systems of oppression that can be taken over one to what we are going through, but she is doing it in a fantasy science fiction setting where we have diseases that don't exist, where we have right now, I just want to say, where we have other species. And I think it takes a certain amount of already understanding oppressive systems to even be able to find them, identify them, and analyze them on how they are actually relevant to our day-to-day life today, and how they can be, the learnings can be and teachings can be applied to what we are living here today. So that's why it's an honorable mention, but you know, I can't go a video without Octavia, let's be for real. And then the other book that is on my honorable mentions is called Bolo Bolo by PM, which is a Swiss author. And this book is a utopia, and it paints a collectivist society where there is no money. And this was the first time ever where I could imagine a world without money. Because every time I think about, oh, what would a world look like, ideal world, you know, we're dreamers. We do think about that. I've never considered a world without money. Never ever. Even though I'm like, I don't get why it's necessary. And this book gave me a world where transaction, my world, not a faraway planet, like Switzerland. It started with Switzerland, the money capital. Hello? Like, I live in the money land. Like, that's what we're known for, right? And cheese and chocolate and watches and pocket knives, you know, and pharmacy. But anyways, like, it gave me the option to think about a society and world where we do not have to rely on money. And that, for me, was extremely eye-opening. It changed how I see my utopia, if we want to call it that. And that's why I have this book on my honorable mentions. And it was also a 5-star read for me. Loved it a lot. It was a very impressive book. Now we're done with the books I've read. But of course, I believe in lifelong learning. And I think we always have more to learn, more to reflect on, more to educate ourselves on, more perspectives to consider. And so I have 3 books for you that I actually want to read. So maybe you also want to read them. Maybe we can, you know, read them together. Who knows? That I hope will further educate me on certain things that I'm still interested in. I know people have like personal curriculums. That's not really that for me. I don't have like a set goal, but it's just books I'm really interested in that I hope will broaden my horizon. All right, are you ready? Let's see. So the first book I have on this list is called Imagine Communities, and I have to read the whole title. Imagine Communities, Reflections on the Origin and Spread of Nationalism by Benedict Anderson. It's a nonfiction book, and it was actually recommended to me by my prof, whom I recommended the Dispossessed to. You see there, me and my prof were like this. It's a nonfiction book, and it's a history book, you know, because I think in order to understand our present, linked to George Orwell, to understand our present, we need to examine and understand the past. If we want to talk about the issues we have on the situations of borders, for example, on wars, we need to look at why are people even so into being and standing up for their own country. So this book examines how nationalism actually comes to be, why people are willing to die for their country and what that actually means and how it's rooted and where it stems from. And I think that's such an interesting thing, because how can I criticize, someone for, wanting to go to war for his country if I don't understand how that belief even came to be? That's why I really want to read this book. So Imagined Communities, that's what it's called. Then the second book, now this is where it gets complicated. It's not really one book. So I really want to read a book by Angela Davis. If you don't know who Angela Davis is an activist. She was the head of the Black Panther Party. She was #1 on the FBI's most wanted list in like the 70s. She stood up for the rights of Black people together with many, many other people. But she is one of the people that's actually, wasn't killed during that time as a face of the movement and is alive. And she is also one of the pioneers when it comes to intersectional feminism. And we love intersectionality here. If you're not intersectional with your activism, you really need to do your research, because it is important that we are looking at the broader picture. And Angela Davis has been doing that for ages, literally. So she has 3 books that I'm interested in. And I mean, the titles speak for themselves. The first one is called Women, Race, Class. That is like her first one. I think it's written in 1980, and is the first time it like talks about the triple oppression that Black women face. The triple oppression being racism, sexism, and capitalism. Like, look at that queen going. She recognized capitalism as the danger as it is. Here we are, still living it. So she really examines it more systemically, that there are multiple things that actually affect us. She has 2 other books that also, title speaks for themselves. One is called Freedom is a Constant Struggle, and the last one is called Abolition Feminism Now. So yeah, I don't know which one of the 3 I should read. Have you read one of hers? Which one do you think I should start with? But I'll definitely read one of them. I probably start with the oldest one, her very first work, right? She's also big on like Palestine, so I think Freedom is a Constant Struggle is about that too. So Angela Davis is the second pick that I want to read. And the last book that I have on my list of books I want to still read to further educate myself, of course, there's more than just 3 books, but those are the 3 I chose for you today. It's called Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wabgeshig Rice. This is a fiction book, and it deals with indigenous governance, which I am so interested in. I want to read about it. So basically, indigenous government is like falling back on traditional indigenous practices and beliefs opposed to Western ideals and beliefs. And I've actually never heard much about it, like in this book sphere. But recently on Instagram, I got a reel where someone was talking about indigenous governance and how it stands compared to capitalism and communism specifically. And I found it very interesting and insightful. And I was like, oh my God, I want to read books that deal with this. And so because I like to learn about things through fiction first and nonfiction second, because I'm a fiction reader, I chose a fiction book, put on my list. There's also nonfiction books that I have in my longer list for this. And this book is by a guy, he's Canadian First Nation, and it deals with a community that is going through, or not just a community, I think the whole country is going through a very cold time. I'm not quite sure if it's just a season or it's actually like an ice age type of situation, and lots of people are dying. And there is a group of people who decide to move back to the countryside and rely on their traditional beliefs and upbringings in order to hope and save their people. And I think that's a very interesting approach. It sounds very dystopian, but also deals with this indigenous governance, which I want to know more about. And yeah, that's the 3rd book of books I still want to read. Does any one of them sound interesting to you? So yeah, that's, wow, I've yapped for a while. I'm coming to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe, Click the notification bell so you know when I upload a video. Come and talk to me. Leave a comment, because I feel a video like this, there's a lot to discuss. Maybe we have different opinions. Maybe you don't agree with what I've said, and maybe you think reading shouldn't be political, and that you having a book is not a radical act in a world where book burning is the next step coming for us. Just want to say that. We'll put that out there. But yeah, I hope that my list could give you something you want to read, or maybe you actually recognize that you've already read all the books I read and you have another recommendation for me that I could add to my list. And I will see you next Monday in my next video. I upload every week, ideally. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, for listening. Stay hydrated, stay sharp in the mind, keep it political, and goodbye.